Hey guys, and welcome to this video. This is a very different video than the ones you've seen from me lately. I'm doing a voiceover while you watch me paint a picture. Today's picture is a portrait of a lady with a blue face, some hair that is meant to be green but ended up coming out sort of an olivey gray because I'm not that great at making green, and also some green eyes. That's what you're going to see me painting today in this video. I didn't really have a specific idea of what I wanted to talk about in this voiceover, and I waited a couple days and I'm tired of waiting. So I'm just going to be reading the first thing that comes to mind. For my Religion and Reality college class that will be starting up again on Monday through online classes, our final project is to write a religious narrative and then talk about it in detail with different specific parameters and stuff like that. And the religious narrative I decided to write was my own. So this video is just going to be me reading what I wrote. Obviously this is still a first draft, and it's just me talking about what my experiences were. So feel free in the comments to talk about your experiences, and please be polite to me. So let's begin. I was born into a very religious family. My mom was in church on my due date, and everyone kept asking her why she wasn't at home resting. My dad's Busha, that means grandma in Polish, moved here from Poland, and her daughter, which is my great-grandma, was Catholic. My dad's side of the family is Catholic Christian. My mom's side of the family is very mixed. We are somehow descended from a guy on the Mayflower, somebody from Germany, and a very small part Native American. My grandma is Christian, but her home church expelled her, so she's very bitter towards it. We moved to Wisconsin from Ohio when I was 2. My whole life that I can remember, I've been attending a church every Sunday morning that weather and health permitted. Because my grandparents lived in Ohio and Pennsylvania, we don't see them as often as we would like, and when we moved here, I was the only child in the church. So many of the older couples, quote, adopted me as their grandchildren. They still give my siblings and I presents on our birthdays and Christmas, which is very sweet of them. The church denomination that my family attends is evangelical free. I don't have a very strong understanding of how that connects to the other denominations, other than I think it is a subset of Presbyterian. Until I turned 5, I was the only kid living in my house. On Wednesday mornings, my mother would host a ladies' Bible study in our kitchen, and I would play near them. 5 is the age that our church determines children should stop playing in nursery the whole time and actually go to Sunday school and children's church. I was very upset about having to stop playing and having to actually listen to what was happening. I didn't really care about what was going on. I liked some of the stories and pretending that I was different characters, like the princess from Egypt that saved Moses from the Nile. The actual spiritual messages, however, went right over my head. I was too little to understand. My family prays before every meal that we eat together, and when our parents tuck us in at night, they pray with us then too. A cute family tradition that we had is that usually Mom, but sometimes Dad, would boop us on the nose and say, Mommy loves you, Daddy loves you, and Jesus loves you most of all. A tucking in wouldn't feel complete without this phrase, and sometimes we would call them back to have them do it again because it didn't stick. The year that I was going to turn 5, my mom found out she was pregnant. I was kind of happy because I thought I wanted a sibling, and every night I prayed that it would be a girl. When I got a brother instead, I was very upset. 2 years later, I ended up with a sister too, but I didn't get along very well with either of them for a while. Suffice it to say, this influenced my opinion on God's ability to answer prayer. To my parents, my brother was a huge answer to prayer. He was a kind of a miracle baby because my mom had a highly negative reaction to some birth control she took after I was born and was told she wouldn't be able to have any more children. In comparison, my mom was on oral birth control when I was conceived, and she gave birth a few weeks after graduating veterinary college. My birth kind of kiboshed her life's plans, as she hasn't been able to practice with her degree and won't be until my sister is old enough to take care of herself well unsupervised. A few months after my mom gave birth to my brother, my mom's cousin, who lived in Washington, was getting married. We were invited to attend the wedding, and I was a little annoyed that I didn't get to be the flower girl, even though I'd never met any of the people attending, or the bride and groom for that matter. The ceremony was very different from any wedding I've been to, before or since. The ceremony began with a man playing a beat on a drum he held between his legs and singing a song that didn't sound very good melodically to my 5-year-old ears. I do not know what language it was in. Then the guests stood up and formed a queue, walking towards a shallow bowl on a stick, like a bronze birth bath. We were to take a piece of incense from the bowl and toss it onto a small brazier in which a fire burned. My mother wouldn't let me participate, and she herself also abstained. I don't think anyone was mad because they understood her religion didn't allow her to, but I didn't understand, and I was annoyed. I didn't get to do what everyone else was doing. During the actual saying of vows, I played on the beach with cousins I didn't know, poking jellyfish with sticks and collecting tiny crabs. I later learned that the newlyweds worshipped Gaia, the earth goddess. I do not know the particulars of their religious practices, but this was my first experience with a non-Christian religious tradition. I attended a Christian school in preschool, and then from 2nd grade through freshman year of high school. The majority of the children that I knew were from very religious families, and many of their parents were pastors in various churches. In said Christian school, tenets of the religion were incorporated into our schoolwork, and every Wednesday we had a chapel session. At the end of most of them, we would have a small group where we discussed the sermon we had heard and were then encouraged to convert. I said the special prayer and got a certificate multiple times because my mom didn't believe I was a true Christian and I wanted to prove it to her. One of the things that was very important to the school was encouraging us to evangelize. I went to a sleepover with all of the girls from my school in about 4th grade, and there was only one girl there that I didn't know, a neighbor of the host. During the course of our playing together, she commented, "So, I'm the only one here who's not a Christian?" Immediately, we were all fired up to convert her, spouting Bible verses, pressing a Bible into her hand, and ushering her into a room with the host so that she could say the prayer in private and become one of us. Looking back on this event, I feel so guilty. She was just a little kid, and we pressured her into something that none of us even really understood. The adults at the event just let it happen and even encouraged us in our efforts. It feels so wrong and dirty, and I wish I could take it all back now, but at the time I was just set on proving I could be a good Christian child so my parents and friends would finally believe I was a true convert. Around the age of 13, I began to question if I wanted to be a part of the religion. There were so many rules I had to follow. It was so strict. The church that my family was a part of seemed very exclusionary, and they were not afraid to tell you that if you asked, completely unapologetic. You had to be good all the time, but that was impossible, so you had to at least want to be good all the time, or if you didn't want to, then you had to wish you wanted to. But I didn't. I didn't feel bad when I wasn't listening to a sermon, didn't read my Bible, didn't memorize verses. I didn't want to be focused on these concepts all day, at every moment, and I didn't think that I should have to feel guilty if I ate before praying or didn't talk in a small group. My values were shifting away from my family, and I was becoming much more liberal. Around this time, in freshman year, I made my first LGBTQIA+ friend. His parents made him come to the Christian school I was attending, and it did not go well for him from the start. He was homosexual and not afraid to show it, crushing on guys that we knew. It was a small school, and teachers found out pretty quickly. They started incorporating more anti-gay propaganda into their sermons, and I knew that it was directed at him. They also got him a personal counselor, who was a pastor, and talked to him until he had to lie and tell them that he wasn't gay anymore. This made me furious. That was no way to treat a person, no matter their orientation, and I became more rebellious and outspoken about how I approved of him and disapproved of the teachers and their religion. He was my best friend for several years, and is still mistreated by the school. When I moved to a public school in my sophomore year, I was exposed to even more LGBTQIA+ people, and eventually became part of the GSA, Gender Sexuality Alliance. I did my own research and discovered just how many identities there are, how sexuality and gender are a spectrum, and how the community has been and continues to be mistreated by people who identify as Christian. I know that each person who identifies as Christian has a different perspective on the matter, and I don't have a negative opinion of everyone who practices the religion. This was just the final nail in my decision to break free from the religion of my parents. I didn't want to be associated with anything anti-LGBTQIA+, and I didn't want to have the word Christian on my diploma. Through exploring my sexuality and gender, I came out as non-binary in school. I also discovered I was asexual panromantic, although the degree of each fluctuates, and I'm aware that those labels may change, but this is how I identified at the time. My teachers and friends use my new name and pronouns, and my mom uses my preferred name when we are around people who are not religious and or don't know my birth name. My dad doesn't really acknowledge it. My parents are not happy about my discovery of myself. They don't try to stop me or change my identity, but they don't encourage or support that part of my life either, although they do allow me to continue attending GSA meetings. As a quick concluding thought, I have no animosity towards people of any religion, only the associations with certain aspects of it that I find insulting to myself and my community. I have many friends who identify as Christian, and many friends who are part of other religions or not practicing any religion. I believe that people have a right to believe whatever they choose. However, if they are personally insulting me or my community, I reserve the right to dislike and avoid them. At this current moment, I don't identify as part of any specific belief system. I find some interpretations of Quakerism interesting, and also a concept I once heard that suggests we are all characters in someone else's dream, and when they wake up we will all disappear. I don't know what will happen to my spirit when I die, and I don't like to think about it cosmically. I know my body will feed the earth and nature, and my influence on the lives of others will continue after my death. I don't know if I need any more than that, but I'd like to explore some things further. I think once I'm out of my very Christian house, I'll feel less constrained and less guilty about exploring other religious traditions. So I guess if I was going to the Christian school still, that would be what they would call my testimony. Because at that school you pretty much had to proclaim that you were a Christian if you wanted to graduate anyways, and I was like definitely not gonna do that. I'm not really sure what else I'll talk about right now, so let me just get back to you on that. So within the religion and reality class, we've read a bunch of really interesting books. They're what our teacher calls religious narratives. I'm being taught by Dr. Johnson. Sonia Maria is her first name, I think. And so if anybody knows who that is, she's given talks in different parts of the country, and her research focuses on religious traditions, mainly of people of color in areas like Cuba and stuff like that. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each of the books that we read. So the first one that we read, well, it's not the first one. I'm going in order of the ones that I enjoyed least to best. So the first one that I'm talking to you about is called Muslim Cool, Race, Religion, and Hip Hop in the United States. And on the front it says Suad Abdul Kabir, but I'm keep getting really confused if that's actually the author. And so this book is a very in-depth study, and I feel like after having read it, it would have been beneficial for me to have a little bit more knowledge about the Muslim religion, race, and what hip-hop is, because you go into this book, and I feel like the author kind of expects you to know a lot of stuff about that already. It is a very good book, very informative, but it's also very deep and very niche, so it can be a little bit confusing to read at times, and it's written a lot more academically than the rest of these books. The second one is called Talking to the Dead, Religion, Music, and Lived Memory Among Gullah Geechee Women by LaRonda S. Manigault Bryant. This book, it talks about specifically religious traditions practiced by Gullah Geechee women, and how they, like, this book was super interesting to me, just the concept of living memory and living dead, which is also talked about in the book Mama Lola, which I'll talk about next. I just find that super interesting because I feel like a lot of people in, like, I don't know what to call it, like, white or Christian, or like just the circles that I've mostly been in, which are white and Christian mainly, like I haven't been exposed to a ton of diversity in my life, don't really think about talking to the dead as something that just you can just do. But the way that they talk about it, it's just like feeling the presence of your ancestors or of your friends when you're doing something that reminds you of them or that they did, which I think a lot of people do without realizing that it's what they're doing. So, like, you know, in memory of your friend, you go to her favorite coffee shop. If you feel her presence there, then women would say that, like, the people who are in this book might say something like, oh yeah, that you felt her presence, her spirit was with you, which I thought was like just super interesting, and I'd like to do like in depth on like most of these. The next book is called Mama Lola, A Voodoo Priestess in Brooklyn by Karen McCarthy Brown, and this is the third edition that we got to read, which is all about, well, as it says, a woman who was born in Haiti and then traveled to the United States, and all about her life and how she practices voodoo and how her family has practiced voodoo, and different stories in the family about the voodoo practitioners and practices. And I thought it was super interesting, the concept of shouting that is talked about in Talking to the Dead, Dreaming Me, and Mama Lola, because it's an African-based religious tradition, but it's incorporated into so many different religions. It's in Southern Baptist religion. It's in, or religious practices. It's in the Gullah Geechee religious practices, which happen to be Southern, but there's a lot of different denominations, so it's not specifically Baptist. Southern United States, but not specifically in. They're part of the United States, but they're like their own place also. And then also in the voodoo culture, which is practiced in Haiti and in the United States and in other surrounding Haiti islands that I forget the names of. And it's basically just getting into the rhythm and the beat and being loud about it of the songs for the voodoo practices. You need to, for the spirit to be able to enter the priest or priestess, the atmosphere needs to be right, and so to make the spirit feel more welcomed, people worship very loudly. They dance, they sing, clap their hands, stomp their feet, get very into it. And kind of a similar thing happens in the Black Baptist churches, where people do something that they call getting happy, which is very similar to having, it has the Holy Spirit comes on you, and it's kind of similar to what the beginning of a spiritual cohabitation, I think is the right word, is described in Mama Lola. So I don't know. I would really like to learn a lot more about these things. And My Family and Other Saints by Narayan is a story that I like very much related to, because it's narrated through the voice of a young girl growing up in India, and all of these hippie type people or just people searching for the truth are coming by her house all the time, and so she gets to see the culture in India become a lot of people from the United States and Europe coming to India to look for enlightenment. And I related to this character because she is undecided. She doesn't know what she wants or what she believes. And so she observes the practices of her mother and her brother, and then the different people that stay in their house, and also of her friends from school who are very differently religious than her family in her household. And she remains undecided for the majority of the book. She's just exploratory, and I relate to that greatly because, as you saw before, right now I'm in that exploratory stage of religious pursuit, although I'm not really searching for a religion, but it is something that I'm not set on what I want or what I know either. The last one is called Dreaming Me by Jan Willis, and then the undertitle, or like the mini title, is Black Baptist and Buddhist, One Woman's Spiritual Journey. And so it begins by talking about her experience living in the segregated South, and the laws of segregation, like technically it was supposed to be desegregated about the time that she was born, but because of where she lived she had to go to a segregated school until like the year she graduated is when it became unsegregated. So it's very interesting as a very white North living person to hear about someone's who's different than me's experience. and also because it was farther back in time than what I remember, but I guess, yeah. Um, and then her experience having people being very racist to her and marching with Martin Luther King Jr. against the different things that he was protesting. She lived right outside Birmingham, Alabama. So when Martin Luther King Jr. was there, she was there. And then she went to college to study philosophy. Then she traveled to India and ended up becoming a professor of Buddhist philosophy. And the way that she describes Buddhism and her experiences with Buddhism sounds super interesting to me. I'm very picky about where I go and what I do because I kind of, I'm like, ooh, dirt, ooh, gross. And I'm very privileged and, like, spoiled kind of. Um, but the concept of Buddhism sounds super interesting to me, and I would definitely like to look at that more because right now, like, my personal opinion is that some people would call it the light of Christ, some people would call it inner peace, but you can definitely tell when someone is satisfied with their life and when they're like willing to help people. And I think it doesn't really matter what religion, what deity, what practice gets you there. It's the getting there and the journey to get there that is what is important. Um, and I feel like I would like to get to that point, but I would rather do it in a religion that doesn't involve Jesus or a specific person that is the only God, and a religion that's not exclusionary. So I'd rather choose something that wasn't Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, just because those are the ones that are most close to Christianity. And I've just had a lot of negative experiences with that, and so I'd like to just branch out and do my own thing. And now I believe that my time is up, so I will stop talking. But I hope you guys found that interesting, and I would love to talk more about this class and what I've learned. So if you would like to hear more of that in the next art video that I do, please let me know because I have no idea what to talk about, even though I talk all the time.